Madam Chair, my name is Anthony Scullambrini. I'm a lawyer in Nashua. I used to work for the public defender. I worked for Dave Gottesman, and now I work on my own with my law partner, Leslie Gill. Leslie was a former prosecutor, and I've been working with, juveniles for most of my career. First, representing them in juvenile delinquency cases, and second, in representing them in cases where they're the victims. My firm is one of the few firms that regularly brings these cases, and I hope to add a perspective that might not be found elsewhere. There are a few things I want the committee to know in considering SB 236. The first thing is that while there is a claim that there is only one insurer, I can tell you, having dealt with these cases, we've dealt with multiple insurance companies in this state dealing with kids in private placement. So the idea that Philadelphia, by pulling up their tent and going someplace else, leaves them without options is just not the case. The other issue is, if it's really about insurance, forcing children to bear the cost or the brunt of a fight over insurance claims, especially kids that are in these placements that have virtually no advantages whatsoever, strikes me as deeply unfair. Second, I can tell you that in doing these cases, they often resolve swiftly and amicably. In the 4 years that my firm has been in business, we've only had to place one placement case into suit. All of the others have been dealt with through pre-suit litigation, pre-suit negotiation. If this was an industry that was in crisis because of a lack of coverage, that would not be the outcome. They would be hard-fought cases in court where there were large settlements against them, or large verdicts against them. The third thing I want to point out is that we already have an issue in this state in terms of how children are dealt with. The taxpayers were saddled with at least $100 million bill for what happened at YDC, and granting limited liability for institutions that service the same population seems to be unwise. We would essentially be forcing taxpayers to maybe be on the hook again for a similar crisis in the future. The other thing is, I want to explain to the committee how difficult it is to bring these suits. There are both structural barriers in the forms of rules and laws that apply only to these cases, and then there are inherent barriers in dealing with this population. So, for example, in a normal tort case, most of the time you can bring a case and you can ask for a contingency fee of 33 1/3%. That's the standard going rate. There's no cap on what you can ask for, but that's basically what the market has determined is fair. In these cases, there's a statute that actually limits what you can recover. So when we take cases, we understand that we're starting out getting a lower percentage of the recovery as our pay for doing the work, and the cap here is 25%. So we know right away that we're going to get less. And the effect here is that it disincentivizes a lot of law firms from bringing these kinds of cases. If you could bring a slip and fall case and make 33 1/3%, or one of these cases, which has a host of other difficulties, and get only 25%, the chance that you're going to take the case is lower. And it's important to remember that lawsuits do cause change. They bring scrutiny and they cause change in a way that protects kids in these placements. Another problem that these cases have is that they have to pass through something called Superior Court Rule 40. And Rule 40 is a rule that was designed to protect children who enter into civil settlements. And the idea is that you want to have a court, through the use of certain experts, go through the settlement and make sure it's fair for the kids. It's a good idea, but it raises the barrier of entry for doing these kinds of cases. It makes it extremely difficult. You have to have an accountant that's ready to go. Usually you have to have some kind of financial planning, oftentimes a structured settlement person. So again, it's another barrier to entry for these kinds of cases. And then you're dealing with the inherent barriers, the barriers that the population represents. These kids typically come from very, very damaged backgrounds. And so one of the classic cases that you have to deal with in torts is this harm caused by this incident, or is this harm caused by something that happened in the past? Figuring that out with these kids is very difficult because they have so much harm in their past. They also tend to be less verbal than other children, and so interfacing with them is more difficult than it would be for somebody who's like, again, going back to a slip and fall, a regular person going about their day, they slip and fall at Market Basket. That person tends to be more engaged than the kids in these suits. And then the final issue is that because these suits often involve children that are very young, you have to have a built-in projection of future costs. So if we have a case involving a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old kid, we know that they're going to have needs beyond just like the typical medical care in a regular tort. We're going to have to build in a projected cost for mental health care. And that expert alone is very expensive. In addition to that, there are very few of them in the state. There are a lot of inherent barriers to bringing these kinds of suits. I just don't think that there is a crisis that necessitates putting a limitation on liability in these cases. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that when they were talking about the ISO care program, this is an issue that we've talked to them about before. NHAJ, and I'm on the board of NHAJ, has interfaced with Waypoint before, and it's just a really small percentage of the kids that are in placement. It represents a minuscule cost. And while obviously we don't want the kids to go without services, the idea that we would trade the cap on damages for servicing this very small population doesn't make sense. Again, the kids that we get, they often have very serious life-altering harm done to them in these placements. And the idea that, we're going to sort of trade one population for another just so that we can keep this one insurer in the state strikes me as very unfair. It places a lot of the burden and a lot of the harm here on the kids. And going forward in their life, there's a huge difference between getting a full recovery for the harm you've suffered and getting some portion of that harm covered by a limited cap. So I would ask the committee to keep this in mind going forward on the study, when going forward in the study committee, and keep in mind that the person who bears the cost of the cap are the most vulnerable people in our state. And I'll take any questions anybody has.
Any questions from the committee?
Just real quick, if I could. Yeah, so as I'm reading, it says you're in opposition, but my question is, it's just a study, and it can tease out all the information that you just gave, and then some. So wouldn't that be a good benefit for the legislature to have an understanding as in the
Whole picture.
whole picture?
I don't think that the idea of a study committee is necessarily a bad one, but as the bill is written, the study committee is looking to impose limits on liability, and so we'd be opposed to that. With the amendment, I don't think there's an issue.
Great, thank you.
Senator Bradley.
I'm glad you just said what you said about changing the language. Just for the committee's benefit, do you know, Tony, how many of these types of suits have been brought in the last year, last 5 years?
So there's two questions. The first question is how many suits could be brought and how many are. And one of the problems that we deal with is a majority of the kids that are...
I'm saying not the Sununu Center suit.
Correct, right. I'm excluding that. So a majority of the kids that are in the system are placed there by the juvenile court. The suits are brought in the Superior Court. And those two entities do not talk to each other in a way that is useful. So in order to figure out how many suits are brought, you have to first figure out and track the issues arising in the juvenile court and see if they translate. So when we were preparing for some of these suits, we tried to do an approximation of how many were brought, and it was only one of the providers. It was not all of the providers. And it was something like 3 over 5 years. And it was, in my experience, it was the provider that has most often generated complaints that could sustain a lawsuit. And so it's a very, very small percentage. The other issue, Senator, that makes it hard to track is that, as I said, a lot of these cases are settled pre-suit. So we'd have no idea if a suit was brought. I think that many of the people that represent the insurance company in these cases, in my opinion, they've been very reasonable people on the other side. And so they've done a great job in preventing those things to going into suit. And that again skews the number, so that there's a lack of coordination between the branches of the court, and there's this pre-suit problem that makes it hard to track. Again, noting that almost all of these cases resolve with a non-disclosure agreement.
Seeing no questions, thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Right now, I have Mitch Pierce and Jamie Powers supporting, but you haven't checked off whether you want to speak. Are you here? Okay. Okay. Marissa?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Marissa Chase. I represent the New Hampshire Association for Justice and really appreciate Keith's testimony. We'd be fine with that amendment as long as we're not starting off by just trying to limit the liability of one class of defendants in very difficult claims to bring when the victims in those claims are our most vulnerable population. I think there are a lot of factors that have to do with the insurance market, as we've talked about in this committee and a judiciary committee in other areas. Just this morning, I got some information from our national organization that I will be forwarding along to the committee. I don't know that we necessarily need a study committee in order to have those conversations with Keith. I really like working with Keith. But if that's the will of the committee, then we'd just be happy to participate.
Thank you, Marissa. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none?
Thank you.
Is there anyone here that would like to speak on Senate Bill 236 but was not, come on up? Could you push the button? Just awesome.
Good morning. Thanks for having this hearing. My name is Todd Emmons. I'm the CEO at Spalding Academy and Family Services in Northfield. I'm a finance guy. I retired a couple of years ago and threw away all my suits, so I feel a little out of place. I couldn't really hear all of the testimony in the back, so I'll try not to be repetitive, but Spalding Youth Center, or Spalding Academy, as you may know, is 150 years old, and we serve youth in the state who have various needs, including foster care. We work with state agencies, the state itself providing services across the board, including foster care and ISO, and there are hundreds of kids in the state who require ISO. The state is protected by liability limits, and one of the first things I noticed when I started there is the cost of our ISO and foster care programs was far higher than the revenue that we derive from the program. But we do it because the state needs it and the demand is there. I wish I knew that there was more than one company other than Philadelphia providing insurance. We have spent the last 6 years looking for other underwriters or insurance companies. There simply isn't one. And every year when I see my insurance premiums go up higher and higher for a program that we strongly support, it's very frustrating. We have been part of a lawsuit which was about 5 years ago, where we simply made a phone call. That's it. We had no care and control interface with any of the families. And the other parties to the lawsuit were the state, DCYF, as well as CASA. And a settlement was reached. Again, we don't know what it was, but the next year our premiums went sky high. So at this point, I think we're coming up on our budget. And it's just a program that increasingly is difficult to support. We serve a large number of kids through the program, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for us to do that. We would like to see the liability limits somehow tied to the protections that our partners in the foster care program enjoy. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here that would like to speak on Senate Bill 236 but was not given the opportunity? with that, I will close the hearing on Senate Bill 236. And Cam, when you're ready, let me know and we'll move on to the next one, 243. All right, I'm going to open the hearing on Senate Bill 243 and welcome the prime sponsor, Senator Rosenwald. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the HHS Committee. For the record, I'm Cindy Rosenwald, and I have the honor to represent Senate District 13, which is the parts that Senator Avard doesn't represent. I am pleased, I have most of Nashua. I'm pleased to introduce Senate Bill 243 to create a study committee to look at whether New Hampshire should consider moving from the federal health benefit exchange known as healthcare.gov to a state exchange for people who purchase health insurance in the individual market. As you recall, when the Affordable Care Act was enacted 13 years ago, states were given a choice whether to create their own exchange or to sign on with the federal exchange. New Hampshire made the choice, and I think it was the correct one, to go with the federal exchange as a way to save money and avoid administrative hurdles. But here we are, more than a decade later, and the industry has developed commercial software platforms that are available to states. These are market-tested solutions that work and can save money. In New Hampshire's case, we could save up to $5 million a year on the fees we now pay to use the federal exchange. Those funds, which could potentially be matched with federal funds, could then be used to lower health insurance premiums in the individual market for the 50,000 people in New Hampshire who purchase health insurance this way. Last year, the Senate passed on a voice vote Senate Bill 121, which directed the insurance department to evaluate the issue and determine the impact on premiums and whether we would achieve better control over the insurance market and potentially better health outcomes with more data. Our friends in the House decided to refer the bill for interim study and suggested they would consider a study committee on the topic. So Senate Bill 243 sets up a study committee to look at the risks and benefits of a state exchange. I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? You may not be able to answer this, but if we were to, let's just say we were to switch over from the federal to a state, would there be any ramifications from the feds?
I don't believe so. I mean, states still have that choice, and there are a number of states that have left healthcare.gov to use one of the several commercial platforms.
Okay, thank you.
But Mr. Bragdon probably has more information on that.
Thank you. All right.
Thank
members of the committee. My name is DJ Betancourt. I serve as the Deputy Commissioner of the Insurance
Can
Department.
you, your button?
Apologies. You would think I'd know better by now. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is DJ Betancourt. I serve as the Deputy Commissioner of the New Hampshire Insurance Department. Very briefly, last term when this issue had come up, Senator Bradley had asked the department to do a little bit of an informal study around some of the considerations that the legislature should take into account when thinking about this topic. I have 10 copies here that I can distribute. If anyone would like them electronically, I can do that as well. But some of the work has already been done, and obviously we hope that that report will be useful to you. As Senator Rosenwald mentioned, currently New Hampshire is a partnership state, and while the New Hampshire Insurance Department performs the functions associated with plan management and product approval, the insurance itself must be purchased through the federalhealthcare.gov website. As described in the brief that is being passed out, a federal or state-based exchange needs to have a range of services available, from the commercial insurance and Medicaid enrollment mechanism to consumer services support staff. And this is no small undertaking and must be done with considerable thought and planning. And so I'm going to keep my remarks brief because I think the report speaks for itself, but my underlying point, and we will do whatever this legislature asks us to do. We're familiar with the topic, but there are some, I think, important considerations to take into account as you undertake this endeavor. It is no small endeavor. That's not to say it cannot be done. It has been done. There are models that the legislature could follow if it chooses to go in that direction. But there are some important considerations that I think you've got to bear in mind. And I think that the threshold issue in terms of the department is with regards to liability. So currently, the federal government bears the responsibility for the exchange. And in transitioning to a state-based exchange, the state will assume the liability to produce and maintain a system that is superior and at this point is familiar to New Hampshire consumers to that of the federal system. And so, as I said, that involves some significant considerations that impact both the state and consumers. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none?
Thank you much.
Peter Bragdon. The man with all the answers.
Oh, I don't know about that. A man with a few answers, maybe. I think I have a handout here somewhere. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Peter Bragdon, Senior Policy Advisor with Preddy Strategies, here on behalf of a company called Get Insured, which is one of the several companies around the country that provides state exchange software. I will not repeat what has previously been said. I think Senator Rosenwald covered the history of exchanges. We had a choice back in 2010-11 area, whether to go with a federal exchange or a state exchange. I was Senate President at the time. I remember that well. And I agree with Senator Rosenwald. The right decision at the time was to go with the federal exchange because we felt the state did not have the resources to develop a complex system like this on their own. And there was not really any other options out there. But fast forward 13 years, and here we are, and now there are 19 states that use a state exchange from one of the various vendors out there, and more being added each year. In 2023, Virginia will be implementing a state exchange in the fall. For the plan year 2022, Maine, Kentucky, and New Mexico switched to a state exchange. In 2021, Pennsylvania and New Jersey switched to a state exchange. So every year some are being added, and it's really a broad spectrum of states. There are red states and blue states. There are big states and small states. I feel like I'm in the Dr. Seuss book here pretty soon. And there are western states, eastern states, central states. It really is scattered around the country because there's lots of benefits to having a state exchange. And as Mr. Betancourt indicated, there's certainly something that should be considered in terms of the benefits and the risks. And the bill calls for a study to include the risks to see what possibilities there are and see what's happened in other states. But some of the benefits are, and they're listed really in the bill itself, is line 13 through 18 of the bill are some of the things that should be studied. Number one, increased enrollment. Experience has shown that states that have a state exchange have increased enrollment. That's in part due to some of the flexibilities that are offered by having a state exchange versus a one-size-fit-all exchange from the federal government. Reduced premiums. Senator Rosenwald mentioned a number of $10 million. The handout I just passed out shows a savings, a total cost this year of $8 million with a savings of $4 million versus the $5 million she had mentioned. That's with updated figures in part because the healthcare.gov, for the privilege of using healthcare.gov, the federal government charges a fee, which had been about 3%, 3.25% to 3.5%. It's now 2.75%. So with the updated figures, it's about $4 million that people are paying in premium taxes that could be saved. Item C on line 15, economic benefits to individual and group health insurance markets. One of the things that can be done with that $4 million is we just refund it to or not charge the premium payers at all in the individual market for this. Or there are opportunities within the Affordable Care Act where the federal government will match that savings 3-to-1, sometimes 4-to-1, if that money is plowed back into efforts that either reduce premiums or increase enrollments. And so there are opportunities to use that savings, leverage it, and actually reduce everybody's health insurance premiums, which we know in New Hampshire is a serious issue. And then line 16, item D says improved access to data for health policy decisions. We would have real-time access to information about what's happening in the insurance market, find out what areas may be weak in terms of enrollment, target those. And that's one of the reasons why state exchanges have seen increases in enrollment, because the states are better able to target the efforts to tell people about the individual health insurance plans. And then item E, stronger state control over health insurance reform. One example of this is when the COVID pandemic hit in spring of 2020, as we know, the economy was upended quite a bit. People were losing their jobs and people were very unsure what was going to happen. Of the states that had state exchanges, all but one decided to have a special enrollment period that let people sign up for individual policies outside of the normal conditions. The federal government did not change it for healthcare.gov. As a result, in the states that did this, they had an influx of healthier, younger people into the individual insurance market, which, as we know about insurance, that's what you need. You need healthier, younger demographics within the pool to help make it affordable. So all those things are benefits that we've seen in other states by switching to a state exchange. And as Senator Rosenwald mentioned, that bill last year to have the department decide whether to do it and implement it if they felt it was. The House committee really felt this is I can't say they're wrong, it's a huge policy decision. It should be made by the full legislature, not by a department or not by some oversight committee. And so they suggested that this really should have a study committee. So here we are with a study committee to ask for your support and happy to answer any questions.
Senator Abar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for your testimony. Just a quick, regarding the liability from the state versus the Fed, should we just spell that out as far as under the risk factor? Just
if you wanted to, yeah, certainly line 19 and 20 talks about studying the potential risks. And if you want to enumerate the potential, that as one of the potentials, absolutely. So, and I will note that the federal government offers $2 million grants to those who want to look at switching to a transition grant to those who look to switch to a state exchange. So
all we got to do is look at it?
What's that? No, for the transition to it. So yeah, look at it as free, but there's financial assistance to switch. So there's plenty of incentives to switch and plenty of benefits.
Do you have a question? I do have a question. Do you know what the average, excuse me, dollar for premiums in the other states as opposed to what someone's paying on .gov?
That's a good question. I do not. I do know that on average, the states, when they implement a state exchange, they save about 50% in the costs that they were paying to healthcare.gov, but I don't know about the actual premium values themselves.
The state saves it, but do the customers or?
Yeah, actually, so it's funded by an assessment on the insurance carriers. So every policy basically has that. So in theory, that money gets passed back to the consumer by reduced premiums, unless, as I indicated, the state uses that difference instead to leverage some federal dollars and reduce premiums even further.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you. That right now is the last speaker. I have Jake Berry here from New Futures supporting, not wishing to speak. Is there anyone here that would like to speak on Senate Bill 243 but was not given the opportunity? With that, I will close the hearing on Senate Bill 243.
Good morning, Madam Chair, honorable members of the committee. I'm sorry, I don't know. Somebody said you'd called my name? Sorry?
I said, you're Jake Berry, right?
Yes.
You signed up not wishing to speak but support.
Thank you. I was just going to say I didn't wish to speak, but I do support the bill very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's wait and see. Okay, we're getting ready for Senate Bill 263. I will just say that most of us are probably in support of it, so if we can make the comments brief, the sooner we get through this, the sooner we can exec it. So I will open the hearing on Senate Bill 263, invite the prime sponsor, Senator Bradley. Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Jeff Bradley from Senate District 3. Pleased to be here as the sponsor of Senate Bill 263, having done so 3 times in the past in terms of Medicaid expansion. So let me first start out by thanking the bipartisan co-sponsorship and, just as importantly, all the people sitting behind me, the really broad coalition of support for Medicaid expansion. This bill is very short and different from efforts in the past in just a couple of regards. Let me just say what the bill does. Number one, it reauthorizes Medicaid expansion and does so permanently, which I believe, given the success we've had, is very appropriate. It reestablishes the Oversight Commission, and it thirdly eliminates the use of the Alcohol Fund. The Alcohol Fund helps to fund efforts for substance abuse prevention. It substitutes the Liquor Fund for the Alcohol Fund and preserves the requirement that the remainder amount, which is defined in the bill, generated by the assessment on the high-risk pool, does not exceed other funding sources. That was a key compromise in Senate Bill 313. And I do have a clarification amendment that I'll get to in a moment. The reason this bill is a pretty short bill compared to almost 20-page bill, as I recall, Senate Bill 313 was in 2018, is many things don't change. And I think that's really important to, talk about the provisions of RSA 126AA that aren't changed. The eligibility remains the same. 138% of poverty for an individual that is $20,000 and $120 for a family of 4, $41,400. It does not change the fact that we're using managed care as opposed to a fee for service. Managed care focuses on wellness, mental health, substance abuse, prevention, and comprehensive care. It's proven to be very successful. We're not changing the work and community engagement requirements that we struggled long and hard over in the 2018 and again in the 2019 session. That doesn't change. And the taxpayer protection measures in RSA 126 don't change. There's still the requirement of 90% federal funding. Our program would wind down if that were to change. There is still the protection of no general funds being used to fund Medicaid expansion. All of those critical components that were part of 3 efforts to authorize Medicaid expansion remain in place. So I think the question for us today is, has Medicaid expansion worked? And I think you're going to hear a lot of testimony today that the answer clearly and unequivocally is yes. So when we reauthorized Medicaid expansion 5 years ago, insurance rates in the individual market, because Medicaid expansion recipients were in the individual market, were among the highest in the nation. Because we moved to managed care, those rates dropped significantly to the point that we have the lowest individual insurance rates for an average 40-year-old non-smoker in the country. And if you look at the folder that Kate helped me prepare, this red folder, all this kind of background information is in that folder. The number of people accessing health care in the emergency room, which was a big problem before Medicaid expansion, has dropped significantly. And you'll see the data from the Hospital Association. The Hospital Association data further shows that uncompensated care has dropped significantly. Let's remember what uncompensated care is. It's a hidden tax on everybody else with private insurance. I think that's a reason why, as I get to the business support for this, reducing uncompensated care has helped to stabilize insurance rates. A key component for when we designed Medicaid expansion, years ago, is that it not be permanent. And if you look at the data, people are on Medicaid expansion for a short period of time, often is the case, and then as their circumstances change, they've had access to health care, better employment. The next thing you know, they are out of Medicaid expansion and possibly on the exchanges or employer-sponsored, but it's not permanent. It's interesting, and I think maybe Henry Lippman will talk about this, but we have the 4th lowest percentage of people in the country on Medicaid of any state. That's according to the Kaiser Family Foundation. That's good news for what we do as a state. Without question, in the middle of a mental health and substance abuse crisis, people have used Medicaid expansion to access those services. And lastly, and I think for a lot of us, the cost has proven to be very affordable. First of all, the federal government has maintained its 90% commitment, and we've been able to fund our 10% share through 3 primary sources. The liquor fund or the alcohol fund, but we are moving it exclusively to the liquor fund. The insurance premium tax, which is a tax that's on all healthcare policies, including Medicaid. So, but for Medicaid, that funding source would not exist. And then the New Hampshire Health Plan Assessment, which is the subject of the amendment to make certain that the compromise that was agreed to in Senate Bill 313 is adhered to as we move away from the alcohol fund. There are a couple of other small sources. Drug rebates, Medicaid enhancement tax revenue to a small extent have been used to fund it, but we have met the 10% threshold without use of general funds. I think that's a very important taxpayer protection measure. And I think when Mr. Lippman talks about the projected drop in Medicaid enrollment as the FMAP provision, the federal matching Medicaid assistance program that was part of the COVID response, as those people transition into other forms of health insurance, we will be able to meet that 10% threshold by all estimations. I think you will hear a lot of testimony today about how Medicaid expansion has helped individuals, helped in their own health insurance, helped them get back into the workforce. There's no question about that, but I think the case has to be made about how important Medicaid expansion has been to the overall New Hampshire economy. And part of the package that Kate put together are several letters from business organizations. I just want to read a couple of, key sentences from some of these letters. From the New Hampshire Retail Association that represents retailers throughout our state. With the expansion of Medicaid, we have seen a reduction in cost shifting to private insurance market, which otherwise leads to a significant impact on the business community. Additionally, with greater eligibility for employees to be insured through Medicaid, a reduction in the cost to businesses allows greater financial stability to focus on growth. From the New Hampshire Commerce Corridor, which is a collection of several different chambers of commerce from southern New Hampshire, in your area of the state, Senator Avard, the Nashua Chamber, to the Concord Chamber. They write, failing to reauthorize the program will lead to significant downshifting to the business community in the form of high health insurance premiums for employers and employees. The Dover Chamber echoes similar thoughts. And lastly, the BIA, the statewide Chamber of Commerce, wrote in a letter to all of us, we will return to the dark days when hospitals provided critical health care but received little or no compensation for doing so. The costs associated with uncompensated care are shifted to other payers in New Hampshire. That is primarily employers in the form of higher health insurance costs. There are also letters that I think are either part of the packet or coming from an Exeter area Chamber of Commerce, Rochester, and several other towns that should be in this packet. The Nashua Chamber has also written us a letter that I'm not sure I got into this packet. So without doubt, we've protected taxpayers, we've improved health care of individuals, but we've also strengthened the New Hampshire economy, and I hope we send this bill on its way to a successful conclusion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Bradley. Any questions from the committee? Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for taking my question, and I appreciate your ongoing commitment to Medicaid expansion. I think it speaks a lot to your commitment to health and our economy and the well-being of our citizens. I would be remiss to point out that, if I didn't point out the fact that with regards to the work requirement, courts around the country have struck down the work requirement provisions as being inconsistent with our Medicaid program, with the Medicaid program. Supreme Court has dismissed challenges in these cases, including in New Hampshire. Further still, the federal government isn't accepting, nor are they approving work requirements for the Medicaid expansion program, yet it remains in our law. And I'm just curious whether you think that's problematic.
I don't think it's problematic. I mean, I think there is support on both sides of the aisle, hopefully, for retaining New Hampshire law for work requirements. I think, at some point that might change federally. It probably has to have the same process that Senator Rosenwald and I and others went through to come to, I think, what's a realistic compromise that is part of New Hampshire law. Oftentimes, common sense in New Hampshire is not reflected in Washington. I think that we work together, especially Senator Rosenwald and myself, and Senator Phelps too, to design these work requirements with Senator Morse and Commissioner Myers. It was the five of us that spent hours around the conference table on the third floor trying to figure it out, and we came back in 2019. So, I understand that the federal court system has seen it differently based on the status of the law, But nevertheless, I think our law is a good common sense law, should remain in place.
Thank you, Senator Bradley.
Thank you.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record again, I'm Cindy Rosenwald from Senate District 13, and I speak briefly but in strong support of Senate Bill 263. The Granted Advantage Program Medicaid expansion not only benefits the health of tens of thousands of New Hampshire residents, it is also a significant pro-business program because a healthy working age population is an employable population. Since its inception in 2014, Medicaid expansion has been a lifeline also for hospitals, particularly the small rural hospitals, by reducing uncompensated care. And something that doesn't often get discussed, there's several thousand veterans in New Hampshire who qualify for this program as well. And because the federal government funds almost all of it, Medicaid expansion is a significant economic driver. Last year alone, it represented a $500 million investment in New Hampshire's economy. I've been honored to work with Senator Bradley on this program since the beginning, and he wasn't kidding about the hours around the conference table. Granted Advantage is an extremely successful program, and we should reauthorize it. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Senator Tom Sherman? Are you here? All right. All right. Henry Lippman. And I will remind everyone, if we could keep it brief, within 3 minutes, that would be helpful, so we can move on and try and exec this today. Thank you.
Thank you. For the record, I'm Henry Lippman, the state's Medicaid director, and appreciate the opportunity to testify this morning. It's the follow-up to what might complement the testimony before me. Today, we cover about 95,000 individuals in the program based on the end of the continuous enrollment provisions. We expect that by the end of this calendar year, we'll be probably closer to 64,000, and probably going out another year, we'll be back to the range where we had been, pre-pandemic. Just to add one observation about the work situation today. In 2022, the Kaiser Foundation reports that 70% of the people in Medicaid, not just Medicaid expansion, are working. That's up from 65% before the pandemic. We're about over 10% higher than the national number in that respect. I think in part because, as was pointed out earlier, people don't stay on expansion, that they move back and forth, but depending on economic circumstances. In terms of the health of our insurance market, I think one global observation here is Medicaid is part of, I think, the overall policy solution to make New Hampshire's insurance situation work better. In fact, New Hampshire leads the nation, #1 in the country in terms of employer-sponsored insurance, meaning that our insurance market's holding up well, and that the exchange products, as Senator Bradley talked about, are functioning much better by having both the 1332 waiver that insurance department has in terms of managing risk, having the population that might have extra needs, which is the Medicaid expansion population, at least for a period of time. Having that structure, I think, has provided for a healthier insurance market for everyone, a better and greater number of employees that are working. There are many studies which other people may speak to, but there are over 400 studies that support that there's been a benefit of it. Nationally, there are 39 states plus the District of Columbia that have a program. South Dakota is the most recent state to be added to the states that are doing that. And let me stop there because I'm cognizant of the 3-minute rule.
Thank you. And any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Michelle Lawrence? Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Michelle Lawrence and I'm from Manchester, New Hampshire. Today I'm here to discuss SB 263. About 14 years ago, on around my 31st birthday, I was diagnosed with a rare chronic cancer. Not a very fun birthday present. At the time, I was working as a case manager for a nonprofit organization and paying for private health insurance. My peers were planning weddings, purchasing their first homes, having their kids, and I was left trying to wrap my mind around my cancer diagnosis. I needed to learn about my diagnosis and treatment options while figuring out how to cover the costs of treatment on my own. I didn't want to leave my surviving family with any medical debt or have to take on the financial burden of supporting me. I wanted to remain independent, as most adults do. After research, I learned that cancer patients are 2.5 more times likely to file for bankruptcy after they're diagnosed, according to the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center based in Seattle. They say life is priceless, but I beg to differ. It does come at a cost. As a single person supporting myself financially, the majority of my income went and has gone towards medical expenses. What I'm about to share is not a complaint, but facts. I am grateful for what I have. I've done the math, and over the past 13 years with copays and deductibles and out-of-pocket expenses, I would have owned a very nice home by now, traveled, and a nice car. If I added up just the copays to see the doctors, it would be $20,000, and that's just to step in the doctor's office. Over the past 13 years, I've delayed treatment, skipped doctor's appointments, not followed up with recommendations, and even delayed care, critical care, due to insurance costs. At times, I had to decide whether to go to the doctor's office or pay rent. I share this with you because those are choices that people would have never known that I was facing by looking at me. And there aren't decisions a cancer patient or anyone should have to make. I am not living the American dream. I rent an apartment, drive a 12-year-old car, live paycheck to paycheck. Cancer is expensive and private insurance is just as expensive. But we say life is priceless and our actions need to start reflecting that. This past year, when my employer let me go and I couldn't keep up with my healthcare costs and I could not afford COBRA while trying to meet my basic needs, applying for Medicaid was the only and best option for me. I am so thankful I qualified. With Medicaid, I've had full access to all the medical care I need, including home health, therapy, and medication. For the first time in my cancer journey of almost 14 years, the primary focus of my care hasn't been on insurance and insurance costs. With treatment and access to care, I have regained strength and even started a small part-time job. I'm not waking up in the middle of the night thinking about having to decide whether to pay rent or delay treatment. I'm able to seek the care I need, follow up on recommendations, and not be concerned about racking up medical debt. I don't have to worry about debt collectors or those notices in the mail. The stress it alleviates is beyond words and makes me emotional just thinking about it. It's why I volunteered to share my story today. Access to quality and affordable healthcare impacts all of us on a micro and macro level. Not only am I a healthier person because I have the care I need, but I don't have to delay any treatment and I'm able to contribute to society. I can't imagine what it would have been like to have this feeling at the beginning of my cancer journey. When diagnosed with any chronic illness, the focus should be on treatment and quality of life, not medical bills. I'm able to stand here before you today and ask you to vote yes on SB 263 because I got the treatment I needed. If I hadn't, my health would have declined. Simply put, I could be dead. Medicaid expansion, or SB 263, would enable the state of New Hampshire to have healthier peers, constituents, and even your family members. It empowers people to access preventative care, follow doctors' recommendations, and take medications as prescribed, to just name a few things. All of these actions are proven to cause patients to utilize emergency services less, saving everybody from you to employers money. Invest in Medicaid and show us that life is priceless.
Thank you, Michelle, for your story. Any questions from the committee? Thank you.
Okay.
Susan Stearns? Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Susan Stearns, and I'm a resident of Samberton. And I'm here today in support of Senate Bill 263, the reauthorization of the New Hampshire Granted Advantage Healthcare Program, or Medicaid expansion. In the interest of full disclosure, I am the executive director of NAMI New Hampshire. However, I do not come before you today in that role. Indeed, I have testimony from our public policy director, Holly Stevens, to submit written testimony on behalf of the organization. Instead, today I come before you in what I consider to be my most important role, that of a mother. My child was first diagnosed with an emotional disorder at age 5, a serious one by age 8, and a serious mental illness by the age of 14. Raising my child was not an easy path, although we know parenting is not for the faint of heart. But honestly, despite the challenges, we were lucky. My employer offered health insurance that covered my child, and he was able to access the mental health treatment that kept him at home, kept him in school, and out of any residential placements or any emergency departments. As my child grew up, there were sobering realizations for me as a mom that his path would often be different than that of other children because of his disability, that not everyone in this world would be so patient with his approach to life, that he might not be able to work 40 hours a week for all of his adult life, and that he might not have access to this treatment. Frankly, the last one terrified me. My child had been a treatment success story. Despite our difficult times, he never visited an emergency department or had a hospitalization. But I knew, especially from my work, what might happen without treatment. He would lose access to that treatment without insurance. He would likely decompensate, become unable to function, be at risk of hospitalization, or even incarceration or homelessness. Once that happened, after what would likely be a several-year period, he would probably be determined to be disabled and therefore eligible for traditional Medicaid because his mental illness would have become so disabling. 1 in 5 adults and 1 in 6 children in our state has a mental health disorder. I know I am not the only mother to live with such concerns. I am certainly not the only mother or father to lose sleep many nights, fearing for their child's future access to health care. So as my child approached his 26th birthday, he and I sat down to apply for Medicaid expansion coverage for him. A few weeks later, the letter arrived saying he was covered. As I read it, I actually wept. Since first becoming eligible for Medicaid expansion, my child has had periods when he has been able to work and his health insurance has been provided by an employer or he's purchased it himself on the marketplace. When he has had times when he is not as well, he has been able to access that mental health treatment without any disruption in order for him, through Medicaid expansion, that has allowed him to continue on his treatment path and live a full life. So, to all the legislators in our state who enacted Medicaid expansion, and to all who are moving forward to reauthorize it without a sunset date, thank you. Words cannot express the gratitude that this mother has for the safety net that Medicaid expansion has provided for my child. I know I'm not the only parent to feel this way, so thank you for helping us all sleep a little better at night, knowing that our child can access essential mental and other health care.
Thank you, Susan. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Bob Dunn. You're down here 3 times, Bob. That doesn't give you 9 minutes.
I'm shocked that you would. Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Bob Dunn. I'm the Director of Public Policy for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Manchester. And I'm here today on behalf of Bishop Peter Labashi and also on behalf of Catholic Medical Center and Catholic Charities New Hampshire to register our support for Senate Bill 263. And I have just a couple of 2 quick comments. First of all, I don't want it to be forgotten how important it is that this bill has been filed in this way at this time. This committee has heard me say before how important it is that we recognize that the principle of the common good is not just a religious principle, but it's a principle that undergirds the constitutional order that was left to us by the founders both of the state of New Hampshire and the United States. And that principle is beset by many challenges in this day and age when there's so much division and when there's so much pressure to consider the advancement of one's own self-interest as being paramount. And so the fact that this strongly bipartisan slate of senators has filed this bill at this particular point in time reaffirms New Hampshire's commitment to the common good and reemphasizes that we're all in this together. And that's really important, and I thank the sponsors for joining together on this. Secondly, turning to the merits of 263, you have heard and will hear all about that. It's clear that there are thousands of people, almost 100,000 people who have already had their lives improved and indeed saved by Granted Advantage. And so I think that 263 can and should be considered as a pro-life measure. And it really boils down, despite, the things that, the problems that we might have with Medicaid or with the Granted Advantage program as it existed, and Senator Whitley has mentioned at least one of those. 263 really boils down to just one question, and that is, if Granted Advantage were to go away, what would be the mechanism by which we would provide this health care to the Granted Advantage population? So we ask you to vote in favor of Senate Bill 263. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Well done. Any questions from the committee? Thank you. Mark Bonta? Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, how's everyone?
Good.
Thank you for hearing me today. My name is Mark Bonta. I'm the plant director for Genfoot America in Littleton, New Hampshire. We've been a manufacturer of outdoor footwear in Littleton for the past 30 years, where we employ an average of about 100 people every year. I'm here today because I want to share with you the reasons why I believe we need to continue with the Medicaid expansion to cover the treatment for people that suffer from SUD. In 2011, I had an employee that reported to work smelling like alcohol for several days in a row. I'm not going to name her name, but for the sake of anonymity, I'm just going to call her Brenda. She didn't act like she was under the influence, but she smelled like alcohol. And after several days in a row of sending her home, I finally demanded a breathalyzer test to see if she's reporting to work under the influence or not. And when she did submit the test, she indeed did test out at far above what the legal limit is for being under the influence. So I drove her home. I wouldn't let her drive herself home. I drove her home myself. And at the time, I didn't think that I had another option but to terminate her because she reported to the work under the influence. So I fired her in the car. And as she left my car and walked up her steps to her apartment, she was in tears. Tragically, within 6 months, in January of 2012, she had passed away from liver failure because she couldn't stop drinking. Fast forward to 7 years later in 2018, I attended an orientation about the Recovery Friendly Workplace Initiative, and that depicted alternatives to address SUD in the workplace. And that realization touched me emotionally. It made me realize that had I realized I had another option back in 2011, it's quite possible that Brenda would still be alive. She needed treatment, and she needed to get into recovery. And the only way she would be able to do that is if she had a job to, be able to pay for that income, to be able to pay for that treatment, possibly even health insurance. So, like I said, that touched me emotionally and created a passion in me for this new way of thinking. So I signed up for the Recovery from the Workplace Initiative, and I joined the advisory council for the initiative as well. And we are now gotten through the COVID pandemic, and we're now in 2023. And in those years, we've added many recovery support policies at Genfoot, like supervisory coaching prior to disciplinary action, return to work agreements, on-the-clock recovery appointments, training sponsorships. And we also have developed a working relationship with local recovery homes and other RFWs as well, where we're intentionally hiring people that are in recovery from an SUD. Over the years, they have been able to access treatment through this Medicaid expansion. Without it, they would have had to wait 3 months before they could get any medical insurance. They would not, I don't want to say they would not, but there's a good chance that many of them would not have succeeded through our program without that Medicaid expansion. In 2021, the dynamics of the pandemic made it nearly impossible to hire and build a workforce. Luckily, we had a fresh policy of hiring directly from that pool of labor that was in the recovery homes, and they actually carried us through that entire year. I think 90% of our hires were from the recovery home, and they got us through that year to be able to meet our labor needs, to be able to produce what we were scheduled. Without that, we would have probably had to cancel orders, and we would have lost income in the state of New Hampshire. And without that Medicaid expansion, many of those new hires may not have been successful as well. So that's not only directly affects the lives of my employees, but it also directly affects our business as well. Today, our culture of workforce at Genfoot is such that everyone understands that staying on the recovery path is a job responsibility, and this is possible thanks in great part to the benefits that are available to workers via Medicaid expansion. When I fired Brenda in 2011, I didn't realize that the loss of job took away resources for recovery from her alcoholism. And I realize now that anyone seeking recovery needs at least two things, treatment and support. So that's what I'm here to request today. Right now, today, the RFW is now over 330 workplaces strong, representing nearly 90,000 employees working in the state of New Hampshire. And according to the latest data, there are positive results, as we've also heard in previous testimonies. This is working. These places and their employees are working hard to not only meet business needs, but health and safety needs as well. RFWs have responded, and they're helping to fight the SUD epidemic, but the job's not done. So I'm here to request to please help us all by supporting the Medicaid expansion to help cover the cost of treatment for our employees that are trying to make positive and healthy changes in their lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Sean Canizaro? Welcome.
Thing on? Okay. Is it possible my girlfriend can come up? I'll split the 3 minutes. Thank you so much. My first time doing this. I'm a little nervous, so bear with me. I'll do my best to keep it in the 3 minutes. Yeah. My name's Sean Canizaro. I'm co-owner of Hope to Freedom Recovery Homes. And I knew this was going to happen. Sorry. You know, a lot of great people spoke. Well, let me thank everyone first that's in support and want to help this thing get passed. January 31st, I celebrated 4 years of recovery. And January 4th, my girlfriend celebrated 13 years. I used to work for Mark, and my first 90 days, we worked for a temp agency, and then I was able to be hired through Genfoot, the employer. But that first 90 days, I did the 12 steps, I did my recovery thing, I did Jesus, I did church, I did God, I did everything that I could possibly do. And I also did therapy that I got through the insurance. And that therapy helped me unpack and dig up a lot of stuff that all the other things I mentioned couldn't. Or the people that I was working with weren't qualified to help me dig up. Fast forward, I own my own business now. I work for a company. I work for Family Treatment Court in New Hampshire, and I'm in the business of saving lives. That's what I do. I wake up every day and I try to do my best to help people save their life. And we have gentlemen in our recovery home. We're expanding with a female house and so on and so forth. And now I pay for my own insurance. So I'm able to teach the guys in our recovery home that if you need this, you can use it until you don't need it anymore. Then we teach them recovery capital, internal, external recovery resources where they can build their life up, build their self-esteem up, go to work, get a job, go to work, be proud, and pay for your own insurance. And it might be all over the place. I'm sorry. I want to touch on a lot of different things. And people need this Medicaid to get into detox, to continue to go to further treatment. And then when they get out, they come to a recovery home like ours, and it's imperative that they get a therapist to help unpack all that stuff that the treatment centers couldn't do or weren't qualified to do. So it's actually a requirement in our recovery home to get a therapist because I know how good it works. And we have people that are on MAT, medicated assisted treatment. So if the Medicaid, this bill doesn't pass, these guys don't get their medication. And what happens with, I'll use myself years ago when I was on a medication called Suboxone and I didn't take it, I felt, as we call in the recovery world, dope sick. And what happens when someone is dope sick? I committed crime. I broke into someone's house, I robbed a bank, I did all this stuff. So the crime rate will go up. People will die. So it's either people pay for insurance or they pay for body bags. Literally, people are going to die if this thing doesn't go through. And Melissa I don't know how many minutes I used, but sorry.
Long-winded. He did good. Okay. Hi, thank you. I'm Melissa O'Brien, and I am a woman in long-term recovery and also a single mother of 2 amazing children. We have all benefited. I don't know why I'm getting emotional. We've all benefited from this. And, you know, my children only have me, unfortunately, due to addiction. And I also struggle with addiction, but also mental health. This has helped me to get the support and treatment that I need. In the last 5 years, I've struggled more with, and I'll be vulnerable, with suicidal ideations. Rather than relapsing, my recovery is pretty strong because I can go to meetings freely and you know, all that stuff is free. But therapy and other mental health treatment that I need to do, unfortunately, I have to use this. You know, I have to use Medicaid. And if I don't, then my children will have no one. So short and sweet, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? See none?
Thank you very
for
much.
your experience. We have 10 speakers left. Michael Skelton, BIA. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Good morning. I'm Mike Skelton from the Business and Industry Association of New Hampshire, our state's statewide Chamber of Commerce, Manufacturing Association, and leading business advocate. I know you have a busy morning and lots of speakers, so I'll be very brief. I have written testimony going around, so I just wanted to summarize a few key points from that testimony that I'll leave you with today. The BIA is here in strong support of Senate Bill 263, and our organization has been a proponent and partner in the legislation that came before this to initially authorize and reauthorize this legislation. In terms of the reasons we see this as an important priority and really an economic and workforce imperative, it's been touched on today, but there are tens of thousands of individuals relying on this program for healthcare coverage. And in our view, having a healthy population is important to having a healthy workforce and a community in which we can be prosperous and growing. As it was also noted, the funding that is tied to this program that comes into our state each year, more than $500 million, $1 billion each biennium, is incredibly important to our healthcare system. And without that funding, we would see a cost-shifting dynamic that existed in our state in the past that falls on the backs of other ratepayers, including the business community and individuals. And we don't want to see a slide backwards to that type of environment, given the costs that businesses and individuals are facing today. As has also been noted, I think the program is working. Good success, good track record, getting the results that we want. So we view this as an important priority that we hope the legislature can act on swiftly, and we appreciate all your work on this issue. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are some. Thank you.
Good morning again, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Lisa Britt Solsky-Stevens. I am the Chief of Government Relations and Compliance at Easter Seals, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Farnham. And today I'm here to talk to you more from the perspective of Farnham. Farnham is a CARB-accredited facility offering inpatient and outpatient substance abuse services at 2 locations in Manchester. Our Queen City Ave location is 24/7 residential, and we've been providing substance abuse treatment for over 35 years. Farnham services are evidence-based, something that is critical in this field. Additionally, our staff just completed training from the Hazelton Betty Ford Foundation on the treatment of co-occurring disorders. This positions Farnham to treat people, the estimated 80% of those who have both substance abuse and mental health issues. We can do this at the same time instead of prioritizing one diagnosis over the other. This is critical. Few organizations in New Hampshire are positioned to truly do co-occurring treatment, and fewer still have the commitment to serving people on Medicaid as Farnham. In 2022, Farnham treated just under 3,000 individuals. This past weekend, our payer mix in detox was 78% Medicaid. Our residential treatment was 89% Medicaid, and this is typical. Our next largest payer is the Bureau of Drug and Alcohol Services under their contract, which reimburses less than Medicaid. Asking why Farnham serves so many people on Medicaid is akin to asking which came first, the chicken or the egg. Having a Medicaid-heavy census enables us to subspecialize in the social determinants of health that underpin Medicaid eligibility, and we proudly occupy this space. The overwhelming majority of our patients benefit from the Granted Advantage program, where the only requirement is to be poor enough to qualify. One need not be the chair of Senate Finance to see what happens to Farnham if the Granted Advantage program is not reauthorized. No healthcare facility could survive the loss of 75 to 90% of its revenue. In the absence of Farnham, who will welcome 3,000 or more low-income individuals for treatment for which they cannot pay? We all know that these folks will not receive necessary care, and they will miss the opportunity to get back on their feet, return to their families, and work to be stronger and healthier. I would add that one of the most important parts of this bill, and for context, I've worked on this issue in various capacities for over a decade. Making the reauthorization permanent is critical. For providers like Farnham, our ability to do long-term budgeting is extremely complicated because we rely so heavily on this program, but we don't always know if it's going to be there. So we operate a little bit on a wing and a prayer in the hopes that logic will prevail and the program will survive to see another day. But we could save ourselves a lot of time and effort if we could make this a permanent reauthorization. I'm incredibly grateful to Senator Bradley for his ongoing commitment to this program. His wisdom and guidance over the last decade has been immeasurable. I'd like to point out that it was just reported this morning or yesterday that in 2022, we lost over 100,000 Americans to fatal overdoses. Places like Farnham cannot afford to fold, not with these kinds of overdose statistics. And finally, on a personal note, last summer, my father died from complications of a lifetime of alcoholism, and I lost my sister-in-law in November from cancers related to her lifetime of addiction. This is extremely personal and extremely professional for me, and I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Lisa Britton. I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Anand, welcome.
Thank you. And if I can ask John Jerzyk, who's next on the list,
Sure.
to join me. I promise we'll be mindful of our time. But if not, we can always take some of Bob Dunn's extra time. I didn't know that was an option. So again, good morning. My name is Steve Anand, President of the New Hampshire Hospital Association. I'm here representing all of our state's hospital. And joining me is John Jerzyk, President of St. Joseph Hospital in Nashua, who's also the current chair of the association's advocacy task force. You have my testimony, so I won't read through that. I just want to highlight a few key points. New Hampshire's hospitals are partners with the state in caring for our state's most vulnerable citizens. It is our mission to care for those who are sick. Our members work tirelessly to provide the highest quality care to anyone who walks through their doors, regardless of their ability to pay. We are strong supporters of Medicaid expansion for a number of reasons, but it allows patients, and we've heard today, to get the right care at the right place at the right time. The Granted Advantage program, as we've heard, has helped to reduce the number of uninsured patients seeking care in hospital emergency departments. Since the beginning of the program, back in 2014, hospitals have seen statewide a 63% reduction in the number of uninsured patients seeking care in the hospital emergency department. In addition, 57% reduction in the number of uninsured inpatient admissions and a 41% reduction in the number of uninsured outpatient visits. That has resulted in a significant drop in the amount of uncompensated care attributable to those without insurance. In state fiscal year 2014, when New Hampshire's first Medicaid expansion program was implemented, hospitals reported about $173 million in uncompensated care costs attributable to uninsured patients. As a result of Medicaid expansion, those uncompensated care costs have dropped dramatically to $69 million in state fiscal year 2021, a direct reflection of the additional coverage provided by the Granted Advantage healthcare program. Continuation of this vital program is important to the investment in the health of our state and our people and those that it serves, and we urge its permanent reauthorization. We appreciate the bipartisan leadership from Senator Bradley, Senator Rosenwald, and so many others in bringing this bill forward, and we offer our strong support. Again, thanks for the opportunity to share a few comments, and I'd like to turn it over to John Jurczyk to make a few remarks, and then we can answer questions.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is John Jurczyk. I am president of St. Joseph Hospital in Nashua. I've held that post since 2018, and this year I serve as the current chair of the Advocacy Committee for the Hospital Association New Hampshire. Today I'm here to provide testimony in support of Senate Bill 263 on behalf of all hospitals and countless New Hampshire patients that we serve. You know, the hospitals in the state of New Hampshire, we are partners with the state in serving our most vulnerable patients. We are the safety net for our communities and have demonstrated that commitment throughout our history. With Medicaid expansion here at St. Joseph Hospital, we have seen uninsured encounters drop from around 9,000 in 2014 to 3,400 as recent as last year. So we speak to, a close to 2/3 drop in the number of uninsured encounters. When we talk about encounters, we're talking about not only emergency room visits, inpatient stays, but probably most importantly, access to primary care. And with primary care, a lot can be done to keep the cost of care for this population low by age-appropriate screenings, interventions such as immunizations to prevent disease, medications to prevent disease progression, and overall, really looking at prevention of the disease and chronic disease from escalating to a point where we have an acute crisis. The patient is presenting in the emergency room, and we have a very expensive encounter going on. And Mr. Anand's written testimony shares some statistics on diabetes. Most recently, our medical director had shared that prior to Medicaid expansion, those patients would be seen regularly for uncontrolled diabetic ketoacidosis in our emergency departments. They are not seen there anymore. They have access to meds, testing supplies, education, and they're being cost effectively managed on the ambulatory side. We all know that the cost of insulin has escalated over time, but it's certainly given access to chronic disease management where clinicians can prevent disease or slow its progression, so much more proactive and cost effective for not only the state of New Hampshire, but for the patients themselves. So in closing, I really would like to say that on behalf of all the hospitals and specifically St. Joseph Hospital, we support Senate Bill 263. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you. Wendy Hunt. Welcome.
Good morning. John and I should have carpooled. I will be brief. You have the letter in your packets from the Greater Nashua Chamber of Commerce. My name is Wendy Hunt. I'm President and CEO of the Greater Nashua Chamber of Commerce. We represent over 400 business members, large, small, private, nonprofit of all sectors, manufacturing, retail, hospitality, healthcare, education, and so forth, as well as the thousands of New Hampshire residents they employ. We see this as a bill of critical importance to both the health of our workforce and the health of our economy. The Chamber consistently hears from members the majority difficulty they are having in attracting and hiring a ready workforce. A healthy population is vital to a strong and productive workforce, and we know one of the biggest deterrents to seeking preventative and necessary health care is a lack of health insurance. If granted state health care program is allowed to expire, over 60,000 granted staters will lose health insurance coverage, greatly impacting the Greater Nashua area. The Greater Nashua region has 2 major hospital systems, several home health care providers, and numerous private and nonprofit health providers. All are major employers in our region. If Medicaid expansion is allowed to expire, these health employers will lose significant funding, some on the brink of extreme financial hardship. Further, without this continued Medicaid expansion, uncompensated care will rise, costs will be passed on to other insurer contacts, causing an increase in premiums for all. This cost shifting would constitute a tax on employers and employees. The bottom line is that a good workforce is a healthy workforce. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I urge you to support passage of Senate Bill 263. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you, Wendy. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. I have Michelle Lennon, and then on deck after Michelle will be Carrie Duran. Welcome, Michelle.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Michelle Lennon. I live up in Campton, and I work in Concord, Franklin, and Tilton. Expanded Medicaid has touched my life in like 3 major ways, and I'll try to be quick. My first experience was when I worked full-time at Lake Sturgeon Community Services as a home visitor, and I was making about $14 an hour. It wasn't enough to pay the bills, but I had really good health insurance with Harvard Pilgrim at the time, and eventually I had to take a second job. And so I accepted a call as the pastor of the Northfield Tilton Congregational Church at that time, and I've been there 10 years as of this year. Working a 7-day work week basically for 10 years. During that time, our food pantry was seeing a lot of people obviously affected by poverty and substance use, actually. And I was approached by the outreach worker to educate the clients of the food pantry about expanded Medicaid when it was first introduced. That was Donna Toomey from Health First, and she's still an amazing outreach worker for Health Market Connect now, helping people get insurance. What I saw as the pastor is people getting what they needed for the healthcare and then getting off Medicaid altogether and getting jobs. Repeatedly, we were seeing that. And what I came to realize is like this idea of teaching people to fish versus handing out fish could only be addressed if those concrete needs were first met. And without expanded Medicaid, we saw people just accessing the resources on a consistent basis just to get by. When their mental health is addressed and their medical needs are addressed, then there's opportunity to grow into jobs. And like we saw families like get a job at Frudenberg. They come off the rolls, they're now, private insurance. But there's also ripple effects of that. When I was working at Lakes, it was very creative. I actually heated my house with grill tanks at one point because it was so hard to get by at times. I had 2 middle school students I was raising who are now, so they're grown. Like, it blows my mind how fast this has gone. But fast forward, and the needs of the Tilton area were so great that we needed to do something more as far as the teaching the fish thing. And as my job grew as a pastor there, I eventually resigned from Lakes Region, took a full-time job there, expecting to sign into the marketplace. I couldn't afford the COBRA insurance. It was like $900 a month. And lo and behold, I didn't make enough money to get into the marketplace. So I knocked on Donna's door, the healthcare navigator, and asked her, what do I do? And I ended up in that gap of expanded Medicaid for a very short amount of time. Since then, I finished my master's degree. My son has got his electrician's license last year. My daughter's graduating on the president's list from SNHU this year. And I currently work as the executive director of Archways, which has family resource centers with integrated recovery community organizations in Concord, Tilton, and Franklin. In that role, it's the same kind of thing. Like, this tool is invaluable to bring people to self-sufficiency. And that's why I made the trip down, because to see this authorized permanently will reduce so much stress. I think back to that time period where I didn't have insurance, and I did some things I wasn't proud of. Like, I had to ask my daughter's pediatrician to write a script for me to address my own strep throat because I couldn't afford to go to the doctor when I had no insurance. And I look back at that and I think, well, you do what you have to do when you're a parent. And you got to pay the bills and you got to keep a roof over your kid's head. And you problem solve, you know. But when I look back at that time, I also have allergy-induced asthma that it's very rare that I have attacks. It's like campers and basements and barns, you know, depending on what's there. And sometimes I have an attack, I end up in the hospital. And I was thinking how I probably wouldn't be here if I didn't have insurance at the time I've had one of those attacks, because I wouldn't go to the doctor for anything because I was so afraid of the money piece of it putting me under, because I was so close to the edge during that time. So, you know, to permanently authorize this, I just think it's a life-changing thing for so many people, and I respectfully ask that you support it. So thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Carrie? And behind Carrie is Dr. Meredith Milligan. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Carrie Duran, and I live in Wolfboro, and I'm here to urge you to reauthorize Medicaid expansion. My testimony that I've submitted to you today is a little bit different. You'll see there's pictures of my family. And I submitted this kind of testimony because I wanted to show you that even though I am the Medicaid expansion recipient, my daughters are the true beneficiary of this program. I am a single mom of 3 girls. My youngest daughter, Katie, was born with a developmental disability of Down syndrome. Because of her healthcare needs, I've been unable to work a typical full-time job that would have benefits such as healthcare. And when I was working more and more hours, I was unable to qualify for typical Medicaid, and I didn't make enough to apply for Medicaid through the Affordable Care Act. So there comes Medicaid expansion, which was my lifeline and continues to be my lifeline. As we know, healthy parents mean healthy children, and having the opportunity as a single parent and caregiving for my daughter to be able to have those mammograms and gynecological exams and yearly checkups is so important so that I can be the best healthy parent possible to take care of my children. And that is the main reason why I'm here today, to urge you to support Medicaid, reauthorizing Medicaid expansion, and again, remembering how important this program is for moms and families just like myself who are just trying to take care of their children. So again, I am the recipient of Medicaid expansion, and I'm so grateful. It's meant so much to me and my families, but truly it is my children that have benefited in having a healthy parent and a healthy mom. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Carrie. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Dr. Meredith. And after Dr. Meredith Milligan is Dr. Claire O'Grady.
Good morning. My name is Meredith Milligan, and I am a family physician and resident of Concord, New Hampshire. Today, I'm representing both myself and the New Hampshire Medical Society in strong support of SB 263. Every time I'm in clinic, I am reminded of the many ways that access to health insurance is directly linked to the ability to access high-quality health care in the U.S. I'd like to start by sharing a few patient stories with you. These are all real people, but I have changed names to protect privacy. When I first met Mary, she was more than 10 years overdue for breast cancer screening. She hadn't gone to see a doctor because she didn't have insurance and she couldn't afford it. When she did enroll in an insurance plan and completed recommended screening tests, her mammogram showed a mass. She was diagnosed with breast cancer and scheduled for surgery with a plan for radiation and chemotherapy to follow. When I first met Jody, she had recently lost her job and with it, her health insurance. She had started rationing her antidepressant medications, taking one pill every couple of days so that she wouldn't run out. Unfortunately, her medication did not work well when taken that way, and with her depression uncontrolled, it was a struggle to get out of bed in the morning, never mind find a new job. Unlike Mary and Jody, when I first met Dennis, he actually did have insurance, but his coverage did not include the medications needed to manage his diabetes. Without these drugs, his blood sugar remained very high, and several months later, he was facing amputation due to complications of a diabetic foot wound. All three of these patients struggled to access the health care they needed due to lack of comprehensive insurance. Had Mary been able to enroll in insurance 10 years ago, it's likely that her cancer would have been diagnosed much sooner, allowing for earlier and more effective treatment. Had Jody remained insured without a lapse in coverage, it's far more likely that she would have continued the effective treatment for her depression and would have been more likely to find a new job when she needed one. Had Dennis been enrolled in an insurance plan that covered his diabetes medications, his blood sugar would have almost certainly been better controlled, and it's possible that his foot infection and amputation could have been avoided. There is a lot of data out there linking access to health insurance with improved health outcomes, and I've included much of it in my written testimony, which was submitted electronically by Mike Padmore last night. Today, I'd really like to focus on the people behind this bill. Without reauthorization by the state legislature, Medicaid expansion in New Hampshire could expire on December 31st. Effectively, this would mean that there would be an estimated 90,000 more Granite Staters, just like Mary, Jody, and Dennis. This would also mean that our healthcare system, which is already overwhelmed and understaffed, would face even more pressure trying to care for patients who are sicker, waiting in the waiting rooms of hospitals that already don't have any available beds. I urge you to reauthorize Medicaid expansion to ensure that all Granite Staters have access to the health care that they need when they need it. Some of our neighbors and some of our hospitals won't survive without it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Milligan. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Dr. O'Grady, and behind Dr. O'Grady is Dr. Kane. And Dr. Kane will be our last speaker unless there's someone that you said no. I would have called you earlier. I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay.
Dr. O'Grady.
Good morning, Senators. Thank you for your time. For the record, my name is Claire O'Grady. I'm a resident from Barnstead, New Hampshire, and I'm a practicing family medicine resident physician in both Concord and Hillsborough, New Hampshire. Although I'm representing myself today, I'm ultimately here on behalf of the rural communities from which I hail and in which I practice. I feel it's important today to highlight the unique impact that Medicaid expansion plays on rural citizens. It is well documented that people living in rural regions of the United States suffer from higher rates of poverty, chronic physical and mental illness, and higher overall mortality rates compared with their non-rural counterparts. Similar trends are noted in the state of New Hampshire as well. These burdens are compounded by rural regions' limited access to healthcare resources, including primary care, mental health practitioners, and rural hospitals. Additionally, the natural beauty of these areas creates employment opportunities centered around tourism, which places rural workers at risk of seasonal losses in employment and subsequent lapses in their employer-sponsored healthcare coverage. These principles are especially important to understand given that about 40% of New Hampshire citizens live in rural regions. Rural counties in New Hampshire currently have higher enrollment rates in Medicaid, likely in part due to the increased poverty levels and the type of employment opportunities that I just mentioned. Reauthorization of Medicaid expansion would continue to afford New Hampshire's rural cohort easier access to non-interrupted, affordable health care that they deserve, ultimately saving rural lives. Reviews of the cost and health benefits of state-level Medicaid expansions have identified that Medicaid expansion is associated with reduced overall mortality, specifically associated with certain types of cancer, cardiovascular disease, and liver disease. These are all diseases associated with higher mortality rates in rural regions. I have seen these review findings play out firsthand in my rural clinic. Because of his enrollment in Medicaid, a patient of mine had his lung cancer diagnosed at an early age, allowing expedited referral to the appropriate care teams and a shot at a decent prognosis. In another instance, a patient who suffered from chronic liver disease was able to continue to afford his life-sustaining medications due to his enrollment in Medicaid after an unexpected job loss. As a physician, my primary concern is in regard to the health and well-being of rural communities, but there is also a unique fiscal impact implicated with Medicaid expansion that I'd like to offer. Because of the significant amount of federal dollars provided to fund New Hampshire Medicaid, rural hospitals in the state have been able to stave off closure. As mentioned, I'm primarily concerned with how these hospitals' accessibility benefits health, but rural hospitals are also key for local economic activity. Research indicates to us that rural hospital closures are associated with declines in local employment and may negatively impact labor force participation, regional population growth, and per capita income. We can avoid this economic loss to our rural communities. By reauthorizing Medicaid expansion, we can assure the influx of federal dollars to help support the 13 rural hospitals in the state of New Hampshire and the residents and economies that they serve. Based on this information, it is my understanding and firm conviction that the reauthorization of Medicaid expansion in New Hampshire is both ethically and fiscally the most sound decision moving forward, especially for our rural communities. I would also urge that you consider closely the testimony shared by colleagues and friends in regard to the expansion's impact on residents' mental health and ability to access substance use services, as again, these are also facets of healthcare that tend to disproportionately affect rural communities. Thank you again for your time, and I humbly request your support for Senate Bill 263. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. O'Grady. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Dr. Larry Kane. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I really appreciate the work that all of you do for all of us all the time. So I'll say that first. And I also appreciate the privilege of speaking behind two young physicians who are taking their time to advocate for this program of Medicaid expansion and for their patients. I serve on the board. Yeah, I told you, my name is Dr. Larry Kane. I live in Newmarket. I'm a retired physician. I work on the board, or I serve on the board at Southeastern New Hampshire Services. That is a treatment place for drug and alcohol abuse. We have outpatient and inpatient services. They've been doing it for 40 years. They work hard, efficiently, and with real dedication. 90% of our clients are Medicaid. 50% of our total annual revenue is from Medicaid. I'm here to urge you to pass any and all legislation that relates to expansion and enhancement of Medicaid. Medicaid rates need to keep up with things like inflation and with competition that people can get other jobs like at McDonald's. We have a resident advisor at $16.50. I passed McDonald's this morning with a sign, $16. These people at our place are worth visiting, and you're all invited to come to Dover. You will see good people in action helping those who have a need. And if we don't have adequate funding, it will be impossible for us to sustain operations. And low rates have a chilling effect on employee retention and hiring. Medicaid expansion is simply critical to our mission, and our mission is critical to you and your people. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Kane. And any questions? It's not. Andrew?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate your indulgence. For the record, Andrew Hosmer on behalf of the New Hampshire Public Health Association, a statewide nonprofit public health membership association founded in 1990 with over 300 public health organizations and individuals as members. Hanan Bedri, the executive director, was going to testify, but she had to step out. We are in strong support of this bill. Certainly over the past 10 years, the history of Medicaid expansion is replete with evidence and data that supports why this bill should pass here today. In conclusion, Medicaid expansion, both now and we anticipate in the future, is a sound, improving public health intervention that will save lives, improve the public's health, and strengthen our economy. With that, I conclude my testimony, and once again, thank you, Senator.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Mr. Hosmer was the last speaker. Is there anyone here that would like to speak on Senate Bill 263 that was not given the opportunity? With that, I will close the hearing on Senate Bill 263, and I'll entertain a motion to go into it.
So moved. To exec.
I'll second.
Microphones are extra important in this room because I can't hear.
I move to get into exec, Kim.
And I'll second.
Do we all in favor of it?
263.
All in favor?
Jeb, you had
I do.
your amendment.
You want me to move I'll move.
Let him. Okay.
Sure. You do it.
Okay, Senator Avard moves amendment number 0446S.
Should we move the underlying bill as
first.
passed?
I move the bill first.
Okay. Senator Avard moves 263 ought to pass. Senator Whitley seconds. Any discussion?
So, thank you very much again, Madam Chair. Again, thanks to all the folks that were here and testified, submitted letters. Your support is really terribly important, so thank you again.
Deb, you have to speak up. They can't hear you.
I was thinking everybody needed to speak up this morning so I could hear. Now I'm guilty of the same thing. All right. I worked with Mr. Lipman and Kevin Ripple from the LBA on this clarification language that ensures that the compromise that was achieved in 2018 in Senate Bill 313 remains in place as we transition away from use of the alcohol fund exclusively for the liquor fund to make sure the remainder amount from the assessment does not exceed the other sources of funding. That's what this amendment does. It really builds upon what we thought had been accomplished in the bill, but I know it's been reviewed by some of the insurers who didn't testify this morning, and at least one of whom, Anthem and Paula Rogers, is there. Sabrina Dunlap, who couldn't be here today, indicated that they are okay with this, what I think is a very small technical change.
Do you move?
I moved the amendment 446.
I'll second it.
Senator Bradley moves amendment 0446S. Senator Avard seconds. Any other discussion on amendment 0446S? All right. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
And move on to pass as amended.
Senator Whitley moves on to pass as amended.
Second.
Senator Avard seconds.
Consent.
Any discussion?
Consent.
All those in favor of on to pass as amended on Senate Bill 263, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Do we want it on consent or do we want to speak?
I'll take it out.
Senator?
I would ask that it not go on consent.
Okay. Senator Avard will be taking it out. And it will go on the regular calendar. Did we miss anything?
Senate Bill 263 is all set.
Okay, good. How about one of the study committees from this morning?
I would move
Wait.
43.
Senator Chanley and I are working on an amendment to her bill.
236, right?
We are working on an amendment to
Yeah,
236, correct?
Okay. You're looking at 243?
243, and I would like a committee amendment for line 19 for liability and for the state as well as for the feds. It's put in there.
Say that
Line
again?
19, page 1.
Committee also shall study the potential risk of implementing a state-based health insurance exchange. What line do you want in there?
On line 19, just adding the language of liability for state and what potential liabilities the state may have versus the federal. The commissioner brought up the potential, and I just wanted it spelled out. that they
So the
actually-
committee shall also study the potential risks of implementing a state-based health insurance exchange and the liability.
Doesn't risk include
I want it
liability?
spelled out, though. I'd like it spelled out.
So, if I might, Madam Chair, I think the way to do it would be to say the committee shall also study the potential risk and liabilities of implementing.
Which line?
That's on line 19.
Oh, okay. Risks, and liability.
Yep.
Okay. You got that?
So on line 19, the sentence will read, "The committee shall also study the potential risks, inserting and liabilities of implementing a state-based health insurance exchange."
That's it.
I move the committee amendment.
We need to move the,
Did I move the bill already?
oh, did he move the bill already? He did. Oh, was there a second? No. I'll second.
I feel like I stepped on here.
All right. Senator Abard moves Senate Bill 243, and I seconded. Do we need to move the amendment?
Yeah, I move out as amended.
Committee amendment.
You move the committee amendment.
Correct.
Someone needs to second that.
Okay.
Senator,
Senator Prentice seconds.
Move on to pass as amended.
we have
Any
to vote on the
discussion?
amendment.
Any discussion? All right. Senator Abard moves off to pass as amended.
We have to vote on the amendment.
All those in favor of the committee amendment say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Move on to pass as amended.
All those in favor of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 243, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Consent.
Senator Abard moves consent.
Second.
Bradley seconds. All those in favor of consent, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
We have an amendment actually back from Olaf on 236.
Hold on.
Who wants to take 243 out?
I'll take it out.
No, she will.
Things are flying.
I'm sorry.
We have an amendment back from Olaf on 236 on Senator Chanley's bill.
Already? Okay.
Josh should just release it, but I can also send it to you. I'll send it to you now, Kim.
236.
236, so we're gonna do that one?
Huh?
Did you say 236?
Yeah, they just released the amendment. We don't have it.
We're waiting on the email to go from Sarah Whitley's laptop to my laptop.
That's why they didn't ask.
Did you get it? Good.
We're printing copies. If you want to.
Is there anything else that we could talk about?
Anything else that you want to try and exec today, or you want
Are we doing 236?
Yeah.
to? Yeah, we're just waiting for them to print out the minutes. All right, then, while we're waiting, why don't we do Senate Bill 176, the pelvic floor therapy, and do I hear a motion for re-refer?
So which number?
176.
176.
I move to re-refer.
Second. Second.
Thank you.
Senator Avard moves re-refer on Senate Bill 176. Senator Prentice. I want to say Perkins. Senator Prentice seconds. My thought behind the re-refer, basically, there's still some concern. We're not sure whether it's a actually coverage issue versus a educational issue. So what I'm going to have the insurance department and the insurance companies do is an education, until the fall, do an educational awareness program to make sure all the providers are aware, because I have heard from both the insurance company and the insurance providers that pelvic floor therapy is in fact covered under all of the insurance companies that cover New Hampshire. So I want to make sure that all of the providers are aware. So that's the reason for the re-refer, and see where we are in the fall. So it's been ought to pass, seconded. All those in favor?
The motion is re-refer. Made and seconded.
Hey, if you want to do that, I'll do that.
The motion is re-refer. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Consent?
Second.
Move to consent. All those in favor of consent say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And Senator Whitley, want to?
Yeah.
Senator Whitley will take it out.
36. We will do 236.
We got the amendment?
Yeah.
So do we have a, do we already have a motion on 236?
No, not yet.
Pass.
I'll second for discussion purposes.
So, Madam Chair, if I may, we have an amendment to 236 in line with testimony from Waypoint that it sounds like folks would be comfortable with. And we're sort of removing the language about limited liability and then broadening it to just the issue of insurance coverage. So I think this is a good compromise. And the amendment is 0646S, and I move it.
So it's, the committee shall study nonprofit organizations contracting with Department of Health and Human Services for children's services with regard to insurance coverage. Okay. Senator Whitley moves amendment 0646X.
Second.
S. Senator Avard seconds. All those in, any discussion? All those in favor of Amendment 0646S, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All those in favor of
I move on to pass as amended.
Senator Whitley moves 236 as amended ought to pass. Senator Avard seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Do we want consent?
Second.
Bertzel moves consent. Senator Avard seconds. All those in favor of consent say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And who would like to take this one out?
I'll take it out.
Senator Perkins Coker? No. Senator Francis will take it.
Perkins Coker.
Oh my God, I think I'm done. Okay. All right. All right, I'm gonna stop there for today.
You wanted to,
Hold on.
173?
Huh?
173,
Which was,
surprise medical bills.
Where are we with that?
we should do that, re-refer.
I'll move, re-refer on Senate Bill 173.
Second.
Let me, if I could, speak to that.
Sure.
I appreciate the position of the insurance department. I sponsored the original bill a year ago. I appreciate the position of the hospitals. My understanding is that the federal surprise medical bill legislation passed about a year ago, I think, maybe a little longer ago. It's in the process of being implemented. I think that some of these jurisdictional issues will work themselves out, hopefully. If they don't, I think that the folks that have been opposing this bill have indicated to me privately that they're willing to potentially consider alternative solutions that might be incorporated in a bill like this. And a re-refer process just gives us enough time to see how the federal legislation gets implemented. I think would be smarter to do that than moving ahead with anything right now.
All right, where are we? Re-refer.
Re-refer has been made and seconded and discussed.
All those in favor of re-refer, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
We'll move consent.
Second, third.
All those in favor of consent, say aye.
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 And who would like to take this one out? I will.
I was going to say Senator Bradley's.
No,
So you can't take it out?
Well, I could, but
no, I'm taking it out. I think that should be it for now.
Move on to consent?
Move out of consent. Is there a second?
Exec, yeah.
Second.
I mean, did I say consent?
I think so. It's
I said
okay.
consent, move out of exec. What should we go?
Seconded. You're also.
All those in favor of moving out of exec, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we are out of exec. Thank
Yeah.
you.
My blood sugar is low. Time to eat.